Hey everybody, what's going on? It's your boy Crypto Bobby. Hope you are having a great day, great night, wherever you are watching or listening in from. Today, I have a special conversation for you. I got a chance to sit down with Dan Held, who has been in the Bitcoin and crypto space for a very long time. I would say a lot longer than most folks out there, and built products very early on and is also building products now. Has a really unique kind of understanding of the Bitcoin ecosystem, the cryptocurrency ecosystem as a whole. So it was a fun conversation. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it, especially for those who are really interested in Bitcoin, specifically Lightning Network, as well as the infrastructure behind cryptocurrency, specifically exchanges. I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. So stay tuned. We'll hop into it right now. Have a special guest for you on the show and on the podcast. Dan Held, how's it going, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, Bobby.
Appreciate you taking the time, and definitely excited about this conversation. Talking a little bit beforehand, I think one of the underrepresented groups or just kind of mindsets from my point of view that I've had in the channel is there's been a lot of people in the investment, in the investment space, maybe the journalism space, but not maybe as many kind of core infrastructure builders, especially around Bitcoin. So I'm excited to have you on. But for anybody who isn't familiar kind of with your background and what you're currently up to, would love just an introduction as far as maybe how you got into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and then what you're currently doing now.
Yeah, sounds good. So I started in crypto back in 2012. I had a buddy hand me a Casasius coin to pay me back for a beer. So he handed me a Casasius coin, the nice shiny gold coins we see in all the articles. And then I started to dig in a little bit more around it, and I was like, this is really fascinating that these transactions can't be censored by a government, especially around the Silk Road use case. And I thought that was really fascinating. I didn't know how it worked, but I knew that if it could enable that, it was something important. And so started to dig in, and then I got relocated to San Francisco in early 2013. And then I started going to the Bitcoin meetups in January 2013, which at that time it was like 15 people. Brian and Fred. I remember when they brought in Olaf, and they're like, "Hey, we hired someone." We're like, "Oh, cool, something's happening."
Like 1,000 employees later.
Yeah, 1,000 employees later. You had like TradeHill, which was the first U.S. exchange that almost no one's heard about. It's a long time ago. Charlie Lee, Jared, and meet, and it was kind of this sort of religious event. It's we're all kind of quirky and super weird. I mean, Bitcoin wasn't cool in San Francisco. People thought you built software for money launderers and drug dealers. It wasn't hot. Then March 2013 happened. Price went from $10 to $260, and all of a sudden, VCs are like literally slanging business cards out at a meetup. From there, built a couple early products in the crypto space. My first product, Zero Block, got bought by blockchain.info. I came on board blockchain as the first product manager back in late 2013. I then worked at ChangeTip after that, which is a micropayments over social media platform. Then I went to Uber, where I was on rider growth and global data. I returned to my first love, which is crypto, in December 2017 to go build something called Interchange, which is a portfolio reconciliation and reporting tool. So essentially, we help all these crypto traders, all the professional ones, the crypto hedge funds, we help them reconcile all of their trade data. Because as anyone here might have experienced in their tax season, going and filing taxes and making sense of all that is a huge. Yeah, so we do that for the big trading businesses.
Awesome. And there was something that you recently put out, and if you're watching on the video right now, you can see Dan's Twitter handle above. And if you're listening on the podcast, I'll have a link to Dan's Twitter handle there as well. But you recently put out one of the tweet storms on Satoshis Vision, and kind of dove into depth on really what that means. Would love for you to explain what the point of the tweet storm was for anybody who hasn't read it, and then we can kind of get into a little bit on it as well.
Yeah, so I've been in this space for 7 years, interacted with some of the core people in the beginning, built some of the earliest products. I've seen users try to use these products. I then worked at one of the biggest tech companies in the world, where I saw how people use the product globally in India, in China, in Southeast Asia. And so, I felt that there's been this big narrative crafted by the payments side of the sort of, which you could kind of like lump together as the, I pronounce it BCASHHH crowd. It's the most applicable term for the currency. And so, one, with the tweet storm, the first sentence highlights the stupidity of even going after what Satoshis vision is, that it's silly. We are where we are today. It doesn't really matter. But second, I wanted a repudiation of that payments narrative from my perspective. And so that's where I spent a lot of time crafting that narrative around why I thought Satoshi built Bitcoin to be a store of value, why he built it as Gold 2.0. And so that's what I crafted narrative-wise.
Sure. And with that tweet storm, I take it you're a big fan of Bitcoin Cash, Satoshi's Vision, BTC, ABC, SV. Is that kind of the end point of that discussion?
I don't believe in scams.
So I think one like part of the conversation that was pretty interesting with with the tweet storm is, I think a lot of people compare is obviously a lot of it goes back to the original white paper, and people take specific aspects of the white paper and point to that to guide either I don't necessarily want to say product decisions, but kind of development decisions around Bitcoin,
Sure.
and then treat it in many cases with like a religious fervor. And there was a lot of discussion, I guess, around like some of the maybe correlation or similarities between like the look at how people look at the white paper, and also like a lot of the points of religion. I thought that was kind of one of the unique aspects that was brought up by that tweet storm as well.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's the remnant or biblical text. It's the religious texts that are left over that we're left to interpret.
Yeah.
It's forum post as well, and that's where with my narrative that I crafted, I believe in a holistic perspective. Like, read the forum posts and the white paper, and look at timing, and look at code architecture. Like, how was Bitcoin created? Like, why a 21 million hard cap? These are all rational things to do.
Sure.
You wouldn't selectively just choose, if you were a Christian, to choose one book out of the Bible and only pay attention to that. You'd look at the entirety of the text. So that's where I felt like I spent a little bit more time making it more contextual in terms of zooming out and looking at all the other pieces. For example, timing. A lot of people are like, oh, it was coincidental that he launched it in the 2008 financial crisis. And I'm like, well, okay, we can certainly say that the decade was random. We can say that the year was random. But he registered Bitcoin.org in August 2008. And then he waited months after to launch it. So like I think he was waiting for the peak moment of despair, and we see that. And we see that not only reflected in his timing. October 31st was a month and a half after Lehman Brothers, after multi-trillion-dollar bailouts, and at the peak moment of despair. If you look at financial crisis Google search trends, it peaks in October 2008. And then especially the day as well. He definitely chose the day.
Yeah.
You can definitively say he chose the day, he chose the hour, the month, probably, the year, probably not, so I felt like it was important to highlight that and then bring people back to that moment. That was a decade ago. So it's hard to remember what that feels like.
Was there any rebuttal to the tweet storm that you put out that I'm sure there was certain aspects that you probably expected feedback on from certain parties that maybe take certain aspects of it very literally or use that to push an agenda that they like? But was there any rebuttals to your commentary on Satoshi's vision that surprised you at all?
I was a little disappointed. I thought there was going to be some good pushbacks. I'm certainly a flawed human. I don't make perfect analysis. I'm sure there's a bunch of holes that you could poke in it. I was largely disappointed because 95% of the rebuttals were a copy paste of the white paper with like sections highlighted in red, which I'm like, I already know that's what you believe. I'm giving you the context of everything else. to think about this. So unfortunately, I didn't find anything that was 95% of the feedback. Um, I think like other people would reiterate some specific use cases that Satoshi highlighted, like micropayments.
Hmm.
My tweet storm was already 47 tweets. I wasn't going to go through each individual payment use case he came up with. But I think those would still be bucketed under my premise that Satoshi was trying to market the product to engineers
Hmm.
and cypherpunks who are going to help him build it. He can't launch into a tirade on central banking policy and gold. He's going to lose his audience, right? These are people who like to tinker and build things. In fact, that's a core ethos of the cypherpunks, is to build and ship. And so he's trying to make use cases or talk about use cases like, hey, you could go do this. He can't be like, oh, it's just this gold 2.0.
Yeah.
I don't think that's really going to resonate with an engineer.
So one point you had just discussed, or one kind of term you had talked about, was micropayments as a use case. And I think that's something that, it's an interesting dichotomy a little bit around the store value or the like gold use case, and then micropayments. And then there's certain, whether it's Bitcoin Cash that's trying to push larger block size and things like that, and then you have a lot of the work being done on the Lightning Network right now, a lot of development being done in that area. In your opinion, is like the Lightning Network, is that crucial to the future of Bitcoin in your opinion, and if so, why do you think so?
Yeah, I think that layer 2 Lightning tech is a critical component of how Bitcoin scales.
Mhm.
I don't think scaling is a problem right now, as we see, because a lot of these blocks there's empty space. But in the future, building out a robust Lightning infrastructure is not only important for speed, but it's important for transaction throughput and privacy. With privacy, if you have multi-hop transaction, it's like onion routing.
Mhm.
So it's really cool with the idea that layer more privacy focused, fast, instant, and cheap way to send money. It's a really incredible, momentous, exponential leap forward in terms of usability, in terms of speed. Speed. I would say speed, fees, and other applications that it unlocks really increases the usability of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
I would caveat that with my tweet storm on store of value and medium of exchange are not mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just putting on a product manager hat and going, if I had to go sell this product, which is Bitcoin, to someone, how do I position it? How do I pitch it? What joy does it bring a user? And I think Lightning helps in getting us closer to that. However, no matter how good Lightning gets, we will still have the problem of intraday volatility with the price.
Sure.
And that's where fees are largely immaterial. When you hear a BCASHHH talk about fees, it's completely ridiculous because sure, you have a 1 cent fee, but your daily intraday volatility is 10%. And if the transaction was $10, that's a dollar fee. So I would say the intraday volatility plus the transaction fee is the true cost. And so, yeah, I think we still, even though Lightning will solve a lot of the speed and the per fee, like the transaction fee itself,
mm-hmm.
It's still not completely there yet in terms of like a medium of exchange.
Sure. And when you look at store value, maybe not necessarily versus medium of exchange, but do you think one like use case for Bitcoin or one like value proposition for Bitcoin is more important than the other in the near future? Like, do you think Bitcoin as a store of value is maybe more crucial to like accomplish that in greater depth than perhaps being highly sought after as a medium of exchange?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin as a store of value is a very important narrative that we should push at this point for a lot of reasons. One, it's what it does well right now. As a product guy, store of value has product market fit, and that's key because that not only it has product market fit, which means when we introduce people to Bitcoin and we tell them that this is what it's useful for and it accomplishes that goal, they're largely satisfied as a user. When we push the payments use case and they session and they try out a payment and it's really terrible, which I've been there for like 100 of these. Yeah. I mean, I was there for a dozen restaurants where Roger Ver bought my first app because he was the majority stakeholder of blockchain.info.
Mm-hmm.
He largely dictated that acquisition. I was there when he harassed restaurant owners to accept Bitcoin. And we'd come back there 2 weeks later and the manager wasn't there. And then we'd hassle them enough and they'd finally come out with a phone and we'd wait for one confirmation. And so look, when that's the experience we're trying to show people, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think that converts someone to become a Bitcoiner or to become a holder of any crypto asset. In products, we call this the make magic moment. What is the moment where you go, aha, I get it. I get why this is important.
Mm-hmm.
With Uber, that's your first ride. With Facebook, is when you had your first 7 friends added. For Bitcoin, it's the immutability and the very hard to seize component of the currency. And that's the make magic moment. That's where like a Silk Road transactional use case is fantastic because people are willing to put up with all those user experience hurdles to buy drugs.
Yeah.
There's other great things too with like remittances where people are willing to jump over these bigger hurdles, but largely that use case isn't applicable to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And so one thing I think you have some unique experience with, and like you said, you've been in the space in the Bitcoin crypto world for 7 years or so at this point in time. But providing the infrastructure for a lot of these traders, you have some pretty in-depth knowledge about how exchanges, some of the infrastructure and technology on the exchange side works. I think one thing we were talking about a little bit previously was around some of the risk of these proof of work coins that are either on exchanges or being added to exchanges, and the risk of a 51% attack. And I think one thing, most recently that I've spoken about on the channel and the podcast before was the Ethereum Classic 51% attack, which has been an interesting thing to watch. And there's been a number of 51% attacks previously, but I would love to hear your thoughts on the risk, not only for like just a user in general, but also for these exchanges that have these proof of work coins, not necessarily a Bitcoin or I guess perhaps an Ethereum at this point in time until it moves to proof of stake, but some of the smaller ones like Ethereum Classic, the risk that it provides to an exchange when they do list these coins and have them available, and then maybe how that trickles down to a user as well.
Yeah, so we have great relationships with exchanges. In order to do what we do with our software, we have to connect to them directly to pull down our different traders' information. And so we work with them a lot. And I understand why exchanges added so many different crypto assets. It makes total sense as a business decision. I'm a little worried that the space as a whole, I'm not going to point out anyone individually. I think it's more of an aggregate concern. And we saw this happen with ETC and Bitcoin Gold and Verge.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin Gold in particular is a prime example because Bittrex lost $600,000 in that one. So this has happened before. We have precedent. It makes total rational sense why someone would want to 51% attack a chain if the financial incentive was higher.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of a logical thing to expect this to happen more frequently. And I hope to see, kind of a rational discussion amongst these participants who are holding crypto assets for customers to start critically thinking about, are you willing to bite a bullet of $10 million loss if like Litecoin gets 51% attacked? As the market cap drops with all of these cryptos, and we're already pretty, I'm not sure if we're in the winter yet or not. Because I think there's still some like very irrational behavior going on in the market. But I expect prices to go lower and maybe bottom out in 2019. I'm not an analyst. I don't know.
Yeah.
But if it goes lower and these market caps go lower, then the 51% attack cost is cheaper. And so that's where I think we'll see this rise in frequency. And I just hope that either there's enough buffer in terms of money in the bank, or in terms of, hey, maybe we should start critically examining what assets we list, because these could become a liability.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, and it's almost like one of the maybe other vulnerabilities besides just like an outright hack that the centralized exchanges have to deal with. And I do think too, especially as more maybe there's more opportunity for shorting these assets, and I don't know the correlation, but I think it was OKX released the ability to short ETC maybe 3 days prior to the actual 51% attack. Right now, to if you're going to 51% attack Verge or Bitcoin Gold, yeah, you're going to screw things up, but at the same point in time, there's not really a fantastic way to perhaps profit off of it. Because there's not really any types of liquid short markets available. But as those might become available, there's really some interesting financial incentives in game theory in play that these exchanges are definitely very vulnerable to.
Or a big double spend would be the other way to do it, where you like $10 million into an exchange, and then you rewrite the chain and put your 10 million somewhere else. That's those two. The shorting makes it much easier.
Yeah.
Because even if it's perceived that the chain is getting attacked, that could make the price drop.
One thing that I thought was interesting, and maybe, and you probably have a lot better knowledge of this behind the scenes than I do, but looking at, in some respects, like how Coinbase dealt with it and how some of the exchanges were able to, it seems like some of the exchanges at least had the wherewithal and the technical expertise, even if they had it listed, to at least detect that there was something, that there was an issue, that there was a 51% attack occurring, and they halted that access on their exchange. And then other exchanges had no idea that this was going on, or either understaffed or don't have the technical expertise. And then even like the core team of, it seemed like some of the exchanges were way ahead of the core team of Ethereum Classic in this case, which I thought was interesting. And there was even a little bit of blowback afterwards about Coinbase not informing the Ethereum Classic team that they realized this was happening. I thought it was pretty interesting to watch that develop after the fact.
In a decentralized network, it's up to each participant to act accordingly and manage their own risk. And so Coinbase was a shining example of really good risk management. Even though in the case where if there had been a reorg and that money had been on Coinbase and then reorganized, then it doesn't matter what they do.
Yeah,
they can't really mitigate that risk. Well, you can call deposits and withdrawals. You still can't mitigate the reorg. So they acted, I thought, very professionally, very sharp, very, very quick. And I really love the synopsis that they provided.
Yeah, that blog post was great.
Yeah, it's really good. Maybe I'm not as familiar with the conversations that went on after or when they notified who, but I think as a whole, it'd be great if we all communicated more often, especially with things like this.
For sure. So you have, I think, on Twitter, you have the Satoshis Vision tweet storm. You always put out some great content there. But just generally speaking, like right now, outside of that, like what's your hottest take in the Bitcoin or crypto world? What do you feel like you're very strongly opinionated on that maybe a lot of people disagree with?
Well, I think the exchange counterparty risk is a big one, and that's why I keep bringing it up. Is no one's talking about it, and I'm like, well, either I'm wrong and I'd like to be corrected, or and I mean that, there's a lot of really sharp people in the space, and I think a lot of the conversations happen on Twitter and Medium, and I think like that rapid iteration and conversation is really cool. So that would be like a big one. I think, so on Monday, I'm coming out with a new article called Quantum Narratives, which is that, if you're familiar with Schrodinger's cat, in a quantum state, a particle can exist in multiple states at once, but upon observation, it collapses upon a singular state. So with our narratives, we've had these narratives ebb and flow, dApps, store of value, payments, there's a million. And as these narratives ebb and flow, this collapsing bear market focuses us to have a critical observation on these narratives. And so what narratives will survive? And I've got a really cool data visualization at the end of that I think people will like. And it looks at the time-lapsed price of the top 10 cryptocurrencies from 2013. So we watch their prices rise and fall over time, which is really fascinating because when we zoom out and look at the big chart, even in log form, which accounts for a lot of the exponential price movement, we don't live through those moments, so this enables us to live through that, to see what narrative survived. A funny one that I used to really like was Prime Coin.
I was gonna say Feathercoin or or
Yeah,
Primecoin.
Prime Coin was cool because it did something else that was useful, right? Like it found prime numbers, which is kind of silly. Proof of work already does something immensely useful. But that was my exploratory stage, and so I mined a Prime Coin. I mined a whole block, which was cool. But yeah, I guess my controversial take would be like, we had a Cambrian explosion of narratives, which is great because it enables us to go explore ideas. But I think we're also about to see like an extinction event too, which is good because that means good ideas survive, just like Amazon survived the 2000 financial crisis, or like like tech stock boom. Great things come out of that. And so I don't think people will like that narrative. But I think we're going to see a lot of those ideas come under critical observation and ultimately kind of collapse.
Absolutely. No, it definitely makes a ton of sense. Maybe the last thing that we could touch on is there anything maybe that we didn't cover today that you wanted to touch on, any topics in in the like crypto ecosystem that I didn't ask about?
Maybe hardware nodes.
Like
So I think,
Casa and that type of.
yeah, Casa and those guys, you know, even in Silicon Valley, like not a lot of people touch hardware.
Mhm.
Hardware is hard, is the
Yeah.
joke. Um, but I think with nodes, they kind of represent something really cool because hardware nodes are a manifestation of like your participation in the network. And then later, you can kind of attach things to that, like Lightning, like running a Lightning node on top of your hardware node. You can do other things that are with that kind of like unlock sovereignty or
Mhm.
unlock like individuality. And I think the cypherpunk ethos of the space, or the kind of libertarian or freedom oriented. I would say that's kind of largely what we are, is about freedom
Yeah.
or permissionless innovation. And I think hardware nodes will become a representation of that and enable us to do cooler things. So representation wise, you come over to your friend's house and there's this really cool, polished aluminum with like wood node. And they're like, what's that? It doesn't look like Alexa. It doesn't look like Google Home. And you can talk about it. It's kind of like it's your like at home device that represents your individuality of being libertarian and participating in crypto networks.
Yeah, I think Casa, I was lucky and got in on like the first batch of the nodes that they put out and set that up, and that was I have that running. I think it's pretty awesome, and some of the like the only really negative feedback that I've seen about that is literally people saying you could put the components together for less on your own, and that might be true, but there's also a certain ease of use element to it that's great. Like if you want to do things on your own, you can always nobody's preventing you from doing so. But if you want to, spend a small premium to, or a moderate premium, whatever it might be, to have something very easy to use, and like you said, have an opportunity for basically permissionless money, essentially, then I think it's pretty incredible. And there's a lot of new things too. I forget the other. It's like it looks almost like an Xbox One. It's like a miner slash.
Coin mine.
Yeah, coin mine. And that's interesting. The actual mining on that looks like it will never ever be profitable, but the device looks really cool. And it also has, I think, a Bitcoin node, a Lightning node built into it, and a number of other things. So it's kind of like you said, you could almost have that next to your TV, like a little showpiece to show you're a cypherpunk nerd. So
Yeah, I'm close with Farb, the CEO over there, and I'm not sure how he's positioning the product. I think at first he positioned it as like, hey, this is like a research tool, because you're right, Bobby. Like, there's no way you're going to make your money back on this because you have these really industrial sort of like scale mining operations.
yeah.
But I told him to position it. I'm like, these are clean coins.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool in a way. Like this is permissionless coin generation.
Yeah.
Like, which means you don't have to KYC AML. You buy computer equipment and you mine.
It's totally true, and I forget to what I think the price point was like $700-800 on it if I remember correctly, but when you consider that versus even to like the Casa node, I think the Casa node is like $300.
Right.
And that is maybe $700 or $800. And then you have the built-in Bitcoin node, Lightning node. I think there are a couple you could you could participate in I think a few different proof of stake networks as well with it, like Tezos and a couple others, and then mine with it too. So I mean, everything's up. It's just cool to see like you can pick apart basically every piece of hardware that gets put out if you want to look at it with a negative point of view, but it's also cool to actually see, like you said, the level and the amount of hardware that's being built that will hopefully be more user friendly and actually maybe allow more of the average non-technical users to get into the space.
Yeah, I think a lot of us get a little too geeky with it here, and we forget that people exist in the real world and they want to hold something. And so this is a nice bridge between that. And it was kind of like the first way I got into it. I touched my first, Satoshis coin, and that was the moment that sparked for me. So I kind of feel like these can be other golden moments as well.
Yeah, for sure. Couldn't agree more. But I really do appreciate you taking the time to join. I think, hearing your kind of thought process on that Satoshis Vision tweet storm and talking a little bit about exchange counterparty risk and Lightning Network. I really enjoyed it. Hope everybody else just enjoyed your general outlook on Bitcoin and this cryptocurrency landscape. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate
Cheers.
it.